Hello, everyone. We tell tales of heroes, towering figures of courage and strength, whose names echo through eternity. We imagine them as paragons, noble and unwavering, their power a gift, their victories pure. But what if the very source of their legendary might, the core of their heroism, was also a terrifying, uncontrollable curse? What if the greatest warrior a nation had ever known transformed, not just in spirit, but in horrifying, grotesque physical reality, into something monstrous, something barely human, in the crucible of battle? Forget the sanitized legends, the polished epics for a moment. Today we delve into the chilling, visceral truth of Cú Chulainn, Ireland's Hound of Ulster, and the horrifying phenomenon that made him both savior and nightmare. The Warp Spasm, prepare yourselves, for this is a story not just of glory, but of untamed, blood-curdling fury. It is a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the nature of a hero. The very ground we walk on in this narrative is drenched in ancient magic and brutal primal conflict. It's a world where fate is a tangible force, and the will of the gods, or perhaps the sheer unbridled rage of men, reshapes reality itself. And at the heart of it all is a young boy destined for greatness, but shackled by a power that would tear him apart even as it forged him into an unstoppable force. Born of a mortal mother, Daitin and Lu, the radiant sun god of the Tuatha de Fé Danann, his heritage was a tempest of divine power and human frailty. Even in his earliest years, Setanta was a prodigy, a force of nature barely contained within a child's frame. His childhood feats were already the stuff of legend. At only 5 years old, he journeyed to Emain Macha, the royal seat of Ulster, to join the boy troop, a band of young nobles training in the arts of war. But Setanta, with his preternatural strength and fierce independence, didn't ask for permission to join their games. He simply charged in, scattering the boys, a whirlwind of youthful fury. He was unstoppable, a tiny, furious world. It was a sign, a clear and undeniable omen, of the overwhelming power that simmered beneath his surface. His true legend, however, began with a single fateful encounter, one that would brand him with a name that resonated with both awe and terror across the Emerald Isle. The renowned smith Chulainn hosted a great feast for King Conchobar mac Nessa and the nobles of Ulster. Setanta, distracted by, as he approached Chulainn's fortress, a monstrous guard dog, the smith's fierce hound, a beast of immense power and savage loyalty, lunged at him, a roaring mass of teeth and muscle. This was no ordinary dog. It was a guardian, a killer bred for defense, and it saw the boy as an intruder, a threat. But Setanta, with a chilling speed and strength that defied his, with a single devastating blow of his hurley stick, or in some accounts, by seizing it and smashing it against a stone, he ended the hound's life. The king and nobles rushed out, aghast not at the boy's prowess, but at the loss of Chulainn's irreplaceable protector. Remorse, a rare flicker in his intense young soul, touched their Setanta. He offered to take the hound's place, to guard Chulainn's lands until a suitable replacement could be found and trained. From that day forth, he was no longer Setanta. He was Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Chulainn, a new name, born of violence, loyalty, and an undeniable display of devastating power. But this was merely a glimpse, a prelude to the true terror that lay dormant within him. The prophecies surrounding Cú Chulainn were as grand as they were grim. Cathbad, the chief druid of Ulster, a seer whose words carried the weight of destiny, foretold Cú Chulainn's path. On one significant day, Cú Chulainn, then still Setanta, overheard Cathbad proclaim that any young warrior who took up arms on that particular day would achieve immense fame and glory, a name that would... However, Cathbad also added a chilling caveat. Their life would be tragically short. Without a moment's hesitation, Cú Chulainn, then a mere boy of 17, immediately demanded arms from King Conchobar. When the king, surprised by the boy's intensity, hesitated, Cú Chulainn's inner power surged. The very weapons, swords and spears of hardened bronze, shattered in his grip, unable to contain the latent force within him. Only Conchobar's own shield and spear, and the king's mighty sword could withstand his terrifying strength. The prophecy was sealed. A life of unparalleled glory, yes, but one destined to burn brightly and extinguish swiftly. This was the hero's bargain. He was trained by Thak, the legendary female warrior, on the mysterious Isle of Skye. There he mastered the martial arts, learning the fearsome bulg, a barbed spear that, once embedded, unleashed a devastating internal attack. He honed his body into an instrument of war, his mind into a sharp strategic weapon. But even Thak, who had seen countless warriors, must have sensed the tempest brewing within Cú Chulainn, the uncontrolled fury that threatened to consume him, for the Warp Spasm, or Fairy Astrid Fey in the ancient tongue, was not merely a burst of strength. It was a complete, agonizing, and horrifying transformation. A physical undoing, a total unmaking and remaking of his... Imagine, if you dare, a man's body twisting and contorting into unnatural configurations. His muscles would bulge and knot into grotesque masses, rippling beneath his skin like angry serpents. One eye would recede deep into his head, vanishing as if pulled back by an unseen string, while the other would pop out, distended and shining. A blood-red carbuncle, glowing with malevolent fire. His mouth would stretch impossibly wide, his jaw unhinging, his teeth becoming razor, sharp fangs dripping with foam, his hair, a crown of fiery red, would stand on end, each strand stiff and sharp as a spear, sometimes even dripping with blood from the sheer intensity of his rage. And from the crown of his head, a dark, pulsating pillar of blood, black as a winter storm cloud, would erupt, a geyser of furious energy, hot enough to scorch the very air around him, a foul mist swirling in his wake. The sound he made wasn't a human cry. It was a primal scream, a guttural roar that chilled the blood of friend and foe alike. A sound ripped from the very... This was not controlled fury. This was absolute, unbridled cosmic wrath, tearing him apart, even as it made him invincible. His very blood would boil, capable of burning through clothes and armor, leaving destruction in its wake. A sight to behold, yes, but more so, a terror to behold, a horrifying spectacle that promised nothing but death. The it was an involuntary, almost pathological response to extreme stress, to overwhelming odds, to the sheer, unquantifiable rage that seethed within his divine, human core. It was a curse, a power that devoured his humanity while elevating him to an unimaginable plane of destructive force. This was the chilling reality of Ulster's greatest champion. This was the shadow, but this was the beast that made Cú Chulainn a name whispered in fear long after his battles were done. Now picture the entire province of Ulster, stripped bare of its warriors, victims of the great sleeping sickness, the curse of Matcher. All men except for Cú Chulainn were rendered helpless, incapacitated by a profound weakness at their hour of greatest need. This was the backdrop against which Cú Chulainn's legend and the full terror of his warp spasm would truly unfold. Queen Medb of Connacht, ambitious and relentless, saw her chance. Coveting the magnificent brown bull of Cooley, the Donsi Fenjain, she amassed a colossal army from across Ireland, an army of thousands, led by champions like Fergus MacArfeich, a former king of Ulster, and Medb's own husband. Ailill their objective, raid Ulster, seize the bull, and return victorious. But they had not accounted for one man, one singular, untamed force. Cú Chulainn, young, impetuous, and the only warrior immune to the curse, stood alone. He became the sole defender of Ulster, a bulwark against an invading tide. This was his stage, and the Tifed Shin Bife Sife Enge, the cattle raid of Cooley, would be his bloody symphony. At first, Cú Chulainn employed guerrilla tactics, harrying Medb's advance, picking off. He used his knowledge of the land, his superhuman speed, and his cunning to delay to infuriate. But soon, the sheer scale of the invasion demanded a more direct, and infinitely more terrifying response. Medb's army was vast, their numbers crushing. To stem the tide, Cú Chulainn invoked ancient laws of single combat at the fords, challenging Medbeb's champ. This was where the Warp Spasm truly came into its own, a horrifying spectacle designed to break not just bodies, but spirits. The first champion to face him was Air-C, son of Caer Fair, a formidable warrior. But ultimately, no match, as the battle raged, Cú Chulainn, pushed to his limit, felt the familiar, agonizing surge, the Fair Fair, a Fair Fair. Air-C, watching Cú Chulainn's body twist and contort, his face melting into that grotesque mask, his eyes burning with infernal light, must have felt a terror colder than any blade. The pillar of blood, the guttural roars, the sheer destructive aura emanating from him, it was the very embodiment of battle frenzy, amplified 1,000-fold. Air-C, valiant though he was, stood no. Cú Chulainn, now a living engine of war, dispatched him with brutal efficiency. One by one, Medb sent her warriors. Each time Cú Chulainn fought with skill and ferocity, but when the odds seemed too great, when his strength threatened to wane, when the sheer pressure mounted, the warp spasm would ignite within him, transforming him from a hero into a force of elemental destruction. He would sweep through Medb's ranks like a devastating storm, leaving a trail of dismembered bodies and shattered morale. The stories of his deeds spread like wildfire through the enemy camp. They spoke of a demon in human form, a red-eyed monster whose very presence could cause men to flee in terror. His name, Cú Chulainn, once whispered with respect, was now uttered with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination. Even his allies, the few who remained awake and capable, feared him in the throes of his Fae. They knew he was on their side, but the sight was enough to curdle their blood. The ground where he fought became scorched, the very air thick with the smell of ozone and blood, testament to his unholy power. The stakes escalated with each fallen champion. Medb, growing desperate, she sent for Fergus Mac Ar Feich, a giant of a man, Cú Chulainn's former mentor and foster. Father Fergus, bound by loyalty to Medb, but still holding affection for his former pupil, fought a reluctant strategic battle. Cú Chulainn, respecting Fergus, agreed to a feigned retreat, ensuring neither would truly harm the other. A temporary reprieve, a nod to the complexities of honor in war, but then came the ultimate challenge, the one that tested his spirit, his heart, and his very soul, not just his physical might. Queen Medb, in her cold, calculating cunning, played her ultimate, most cruel card. She sent for Ferdia, son of Dam Féin, a warrior of the Fur Dyad. Ferdia was not just a champion, he was Cú Chulainn's foster, brother, his closest friend, trained alongside him under the legendary Cú. They had shared meals, spilled blood in training, and forged a bond deeper than any familial tie. This was not a clash of strangers. It was a tearing apart of brotherhood, a duel of destiny forged in shared blood, and an unbreakable bond. Medb's promises of vast lands, immense gold, and unparalleled glory were irresistible, or so she hoped, to sway Ferdia, bound by a complex web of honor, by oaths, and by the impossible choices of war. Ferdia reluctantly agreed to face his kin. He knew the cost, the unbearable anguish of what he was about to do. Cú Chulainn, upon seeing his beloved friend, his training partner, his brother, in arms, pleaded with him, his voice laced with agony. "Ferdia, my brother, do not let us be the instruments of Medbeb's malice. Our bonds run deeper than any queen's command. We fought together, bled together, learned together. Let us not now shed each other's blood for the whims of a queen." But the die was cast. Medb had ensured there was no turning back for Ferdia, threatening his reputation, his family, his very standing as a warrior if he refused. The field of battle, a ford of the river, became their agonizing arena, and the air crackled not just with anticipation, but with profound sorrow, a palpable sense of impending tragedy. For 3 grueling days they fought, a devastating dance of death. They were perfectly matched, their shared training a cruel irony, turning their intimate knowledge into lethal precision against one another. Neither could gain a decisive advantage. Their skills were too finely honed, their understanding of each other too profound. Their bodies became a canvas of wounds, their breath ragged, their wills unyielding. But on the 3rd night, As exhaustion began to blur their senses, as their bodies screamed for rest, as their shared history weighed heavily on their every move, Cú Chulainn knew he had to unleash the unspeakable. He had to bring forth the Feriastrad Fey. The decision itself was agonizing, perhaps more painful than any wound. He fought it, perhaps for Ferdia, for the memory of their brotherhood, but the survival of Ulster, his people, his king, weighed heavier than any personal agony, any bond. As the warp spasm seized him, his features twisting into that monstrous visage, his body writhing in that unholy transformation, Ferdia could only watch in horror, recognizing the terror, but still seeing the flicker of his friend beneath the beast. The battle intensified, an unholy symphony of steel and screams, of ancient magic and raw, primal power. With his G-Fea bulg, the barbed spear that blossomed lethally within its victim, Cú Chulainn delivered the final, fatal blow. The spear, thrown with the full, hideous power of the warp spasm, pierced Ferdia's armor, tearing through his body. Its barb spreading destruction. As Ferdia fell, his last words were not of anger, but of lament for a friendship shattered, a bond irrevocably broken by the cruel hand of war and fate, Cú Chulainn standing over his fallen brother. The warp spasm slowly receding, collapsed beside him, grief tearing at his soul more savagely than any wound. He cradled Ferdia's lifeless body, weeping bitter tears, the raw human anguish starkly contrasting with the monstrous rage he had just displayed. The victory was hollow, stained with the blood of brotherhood, a testament to the devastating price of his terrifying power. The Tiefenin continued, a relentless, bloody grind. Cú Chulainn, scarred by the loss of Ferdia, became even more formidable, a whirlwind of grief-fueled fury. He carved a path of devastation through Medb's forces, his Feriastrad Fey manifesting with chilling regularity, each eruption a fresh wave of terror for his enemies. He engaged in single combat against countless champions. Slaying them all, he used his knowledge of the land to set traps. He became a one-man army, a living legend forged in the crucible of ceaseless battle. His presence alone was often enough to shatter morale, to send seasoned warriors fleeing in disarray. The pillar of blood above his head, a beacon of destruction, became a terrifying omen for those who dared to face him. The Irish landscape itself became a testament to his fury. Rivers turning red with blood, the sheer weight of his combat, the constant manifestation of the warp spasm, took an immense toll, not just on his body, which seemed to defy all mortal limits, but on his mind, on his very soul. Each Feriastrad Fey chipped away at his humanity, leaving him more isolated, more beast than man in the eyes of others. He was a hero, yes, but a terrifying, alienated. The Tiefey eventually reached its climax. The men of Ulster, finally roused from their curse, awoke and joined the fray. The full might of the province, combined with Cú Chulainn's unparalleled ferocity, pushed Medb's army into a full retreat. The Don Cú, the coveted brown bull, was eventually recovered, though its journey back was fraught with its own tragic events. Cú Chulainn, the young warrior who stood alone against an empire, had saved Ulster. His fame was cemented, his legend undeniable. But the cost was immeasurable. The internal conflict of Cú Chulainn was profound. Was the warp spasm a divine gift, empowering him to fulfill his destiny as Ulster's protector? Or was it a demonic curse, an uncontrollable beast that consumed his essence, turning him into an instrument of pure, unthinking destruction? The answer perhaps lay in the duality of his being, a God-born hero, forever wrestling with the monstrous power that resided within him. He was a champion of light who wielded the darkness, a protector whose very protection brought an unholy terror. The shadow of the Feriastrad Fey would follow him throughout his tragically short life. Despite his incredible victories, Cú Chulainn's prophecy of a short, glorious life hung over him like a shroud. Many years later, the cycle of vengeance came calling Medb. Still smarting from her defeat, orchestrated his downfall. She gathered the children of the warriors Cú Chulainn had slain. Led by Lugaid Mac Conroe Fey, these vengeful sons, driven by ancient oaths and bitter hatred, set a trap. They created magical spears, each enchanted with a curse, one that would kill a king, another a god, and a third a warrior. Cú Chulainn, ever the fearless warrior, knew his end was near. His geasa, his sacred taboos, were broken one by one through cunning deception. Despite the warnings of his charioteer, Lag, and his own premonitions, he rode out to face his fate. One by one, the cursed spears found their mark. The first killed his charioteer, Lag, who was as dear to him as a brother. The second struck his beloved horse, Liath Macha, which then fled into the lake, leaving Cú Chulainn utterly alone. The final spear, thrown by mortally wounded, he tied himself to a standing stone with his own belt, refusing to die lying down, wanting to face his enemies upright, even in death. He stood there, defiant, a last terrifying monument to his unwavering will. The very act of tying himself, even as his lifeblood ebbed, was a final, desperate act of strength, of raw defiance against his enemies dared not approach him. So potent was the aura of his power, so ingrained was the fear of his warp spasm, even in his dying moments. They waited knowing that even in death, Cú Chulainn was a force to be reckoned with. Only when a raven landed on his shoulder, a grim harbinger of death, did they realize he had finally succumbed. He had died as he lived, utterly alone, supremely Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster, the lightning-fast warrior, the embodiment of unchecked rage and unparalleled heroism, was gone. But his legend, woven from threads of glory and horror, lived on. His story is a powerful exploration of the human condition, or perhaps the superhuman condition. It asks us to confront the duality of power. The warp spasm, that agonizing, terrifying transformation, was both the source of his invincibility and the mark of his tragic isolation. It elevated him beyond mortal men, yet it stripped him of his conventional humanity. He saved his people, but he did so by becoming a terrifying force, a living weapon that instilled fear in all who witnessed it. Was he a hero in spite of his Fenrir-Astrad? Did his monstrous power make him less human, or did it expose a primal, essential truth about the depths of human potential for both good and destructive force? The tale of Cú Chulainn and his warp spasm remains a chilling reminder that the greatest heroes are often born from the darkest, most terrifying and uncontrollable aspects of power. His legacy is not just one of victory, but of the immense soul-shattering cost of wielding such devastating might. It's a story etched in blood and glory, forever binding the terrifying transformation of the Fenrir-Astrad, fate to the name of Ireland's greatest, most formidable, and most terrifying warrior. That is all for today's video. If you found this journey into the dark heart of Irish mythology captivating, please subscribe, like this video, and support us by sharing it with fellow myth enthusiasts. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.